Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where and when you're listening to this webinar. Welcome to Dun & Bradstreet's webinar, Breaking Through the Data Dichotomy, how to elevate your game from data operations to revenue operations. My name is Sean Crowley. I'm going to be one of your presenters today, and just wanted to thank you all for joining us. A couple of things that I wanted to handle from a housekeeping perspective. During today's presentation, we invite you to submit any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. Our webinar is scheduled to run for about 30 minutes, and we'll have time at the end to take some questions from the audience. So please utilize that box on the right-hand side. All phone lines are going to remain muted throughout the duration of today's call. And once again, just use that Q&A session, the box on the right-hand side. So let's just jump in. Given that we have half an hour, I'm pleased to be joined here today by two people that I greatly respect and have had the opportunity to work with here recently. Kate O'Leary is the Director of Revenue Data Operations for Brainshark. She's got a great story to tell in terms of how they've evolved their approach around data management at Brainshark. And then also Carrie Cunningham, who is the VP and Principal Analyst for Marketing Operations for Forrester and previously of Sirius Decisions. So Carrie's going to bring some great insights into structure and kind of really key components for building an effective strategy. I was going to just start things off here in terms of, talking about what we found. So we're now in the 7th year of running this annual B2B Sales and Marketing data report. This started way back when we were at Net Prospects, before Net Prospects was acquired by Dun & Bradstreet, and really was an opportunity for us to survey our peers, your peers, in terms of what we were finding out in the marketplace and attitudes and approaches to how to gain full value from the data that we all rely on a day-to-day basis. And one of the big things that really jumped out at us that was very encouraging to see was that organizations have finally recognized the importance of data quality. We actually took about an 18-month hiatus between the 6th and the 7th report of doing this, and we saw a dramatic increase in adoption and recognition of the importance of data quality to sales and marketing data. During the 6th annual report, these statistics were in the 70-ish percentile range, and now clearly, in terms of B2B sales and marketing, and we surveyed over 500 accounts, both sales and marketing professionals in the United States, the UK, Canada. So there was a good, sampling size of companies of all sizes as well. And you see, as it relates to company effectiveness, campaign targeting, ability to execute consistently, across all of these, people are recognizing the importance of data quality. And as a result of it, right, they're starting to see the results of maintaining that data quality. So there's a real, correlation between those that increase their investment in data quality. Those are seeing significant returns and are definitely being able to measure the impact of that. And conversely, those who are decreasing investment are seeing declining performance, are not, being able to maintain at the same level of their peers who are investing in it. And so when you think about when companies fail to commit to a continuous process of data quality improvement, you're going to reduce the impact across all of your go-to-market activities, which limits the long-term ROI, not only of data management and the investments that you make there, but you also run the risk of being inefficient in how you spend money as it relates to your go-to-market strategy. So as a result, no surprise here, right? People are planning on investing more in data quality. You can see here that the vast majority agree that investing in data quality will improve sales and marketing performance. That correlation has clearly been made here. and their plans to increase investment. At the very least, the majority are maintaining their spend, and a good portion of companies are looking to increase that investment as well, which is also a positive sign. The key thing here is understanding and recognizing, where your investments will have the strongest impact. And this is where we started to really see some of this dichotomy that we talked about, where people recognize the importance of data quality, but when you actually look at where they think data quality has a significant impact, they rank these three as the top three areas for being positively impacted by data quality investment: sales prospecting and closing, generating customer insights and intelligence, and campaign execution. So I can see that. But one of the things that really surprised me from these results is that when you looked at all the other solutions or initiatives that we were asking B2B sales and marketing professionals to look at, relevant and meaningful personalization, ABM, aligning online and offline activities, and white space identification ranked significantly lower in having being positively impacted by data quality than some of those other strategies, which was very interesting to me, because when you look at being able to personalize, for instance, being able to personalize content on your website or content in an email, that takes an understanding of what's going on at that company from a firmographic, from a demographic, and from an analytics perspective. ABM as well. You need to have clear, concise, consistent, high-quality data to understand who do I want to go after, what percentage of share of wallet am I gaining from this, and what percentage have I penetrated through their entire corporate hierarchy from a cross-sell and an upsell perspective. So really felt that this was a little bit of a lack of recognition on people's parts, and that there's an opportunity there for us to kind of refocus around this as well. So in order to do this, and Kate's going to talk about this, and Carrie will talk about this, in terms of focusing on cleansing your data, you need to understand where your blockers are, right, towards getting investment on this. One is cost, that many times it's not an insignificant investment. Better ROI with other initiatives, lack of understanding of data quality, lack of results evidenced. So a lot of this comes down to how do you measure, right, the impact of data quality investments. So Kate's going to talk a little bit about that, and here at Dun & Bradstreet we've released a couple of, one of which is an ROI calculator for data quality that can also be employed. So Kate's going to talk about recognize where you can get some quick wins, and I think that these are, obviously we recognize this as sales and marketing professionals. Targeting improvements will be gained by focusing on data quality. Segmentation improvements, those who are actually being able to look at and identify new opportunities for growth. Investing in data quality will help you uncover those faster. And those who are investing see this much clearly than those who are decreasing investment in data quality. So I'm going to pass things over to Kate to talk about the evolution that she's gone through, and I think that she's got a great story, and then Carrie will come in and talk about how to establish, a good governance structure, and then I'll come back and just close with a couple of final thoughts. Kate?
Great. Thank you so much, Sean, and I'm really excited to be here and speak on this topic and hear from Carrie as well. As a lot of what you're going to hear from me, we based a lot of the framework on the research and the work that Carrie does at Forrester and Sirius Decisions. So for those of you that are not familiar with Brainshark, we are a data-driven sales readiness platform that helps our customers prepare their client-facing teams with content, training, and coaching materials, and we're happy to be offering scorecarding to our customers where they can really sort of answer the question, is this working? Is our training and coaching and our management capabilities, are they working? Are they helping our teams to perform at the highest level? So I've been with Brainshark for about 8 years, working, in many aspects of, CRM administration and data operations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey and how we kind of transitioned ourselves from a strictly database management and data operations team, and really have now evolved into a RevOps group. So if we take a look back 2 to 3 years ago, this is really where we began our big journey and really partnering with D&B and creating a data management strategy across our organization. So if you look back about 2 to 3 years ago, we had some data challenges in our CRM. We had a lot of accounts, almost 50,000 accounts, almost 1 million leads and contacts, and especially on the account side, we were missing a lot of data that was impacting productivity as leads were coming in and had missing revenue or a missing title. We weren't really able to segment the database. We had lack of insight into our territories, and our reps were interested in expanding and growing into their customer base, and we didn't have a full view of the corporate structure there. Our trust was low. There was no single source of truth. There were a lot of questions coming into our Salesforce request queue, as we call it, asking about ownership and about revenue or industry, and really we were too reactive in our maintenance practices. We spent a lot of time answering questions instead of being more proactive and doing the things that I'm going to talk about that we're doing today. So the other big thing here was that we had a new chief sales officer. She had some great plans for how to align our territories differently, how we could get the most out of a certain corporate structure, and how we could cross-sell and upsell better, and really how we could support our customers better. And in order to do that, we really needed to clean up our data. And we also had trouble aligning ourselves to our marketing's ABM strategy. I think that there was a real chance for us to say, if we're going to, launch an ABM strategy or bring in an ABM tool, we really didn't have the data to support it. And so we really wanted to structure our data to support the business and our goals, and then to also make sure that we were spending our marketing dollars efficiently, and also letting our reps know that we were providing them with the right data so that they could have productive outreach practices into their prospects. So as Sean mentioned, and I love this phrase, it's getting some quick wins. I mean, you think about taking your CRM data and overhauling it and cleaning it up, it can be very overwhelming. So I love this phrase, getting quick wins, and I think the first thing we did was we partnered with D&B and did a data health scan. What this allowed us to do was provide a visual PDF format to our executive team and really showed them this is the impact that partnering with D&B or another data provider could provide for us. So it gave buy-in early. It let them see, this is the impact that we would have on our data. This is how, what we would get from the partnership. So that health scan was really critical in sort of getting executive buy-in and showing them, wow, this would be a huge thing for our entire sales organization if we do this. So that's a free service, so I encourage folks, if you're interested in learning more, to sync up with Sean afterwards. Another quick win for us, we made it official, and this allowed us to, and going back to what Sean mentioned about making it a commitment, we made it official, gave it a mission statement. We appointed a data steward, and that was possible for us to do that, and just saying this is, who owns this is the goal, and make sure that it aligns back to your business's goals. So for us, we called it the Data Quality Initiative. It was a way that we could, every week we would send updates to our executive team, and when they saw that phrase, they knew, oh, this is that big data project. I want to see how it's been going. So we set some specific and clear goals. We, set up some clear ownership of tasks and elements, and we set deadlines. What I really want to point out here is be transparent, but also, don't overpromise. It's a big undertaking to clean up a Salesforce database or a CRM database. So if I could encourage, folks to try to set goals that you can achieve, especially in the beginning, and it could be as simple as, for us, it was making sure that all of our accounts had a DUNS number. And if they didn't, we set those aside for later, where we would give them one more look, and then we eventually archive those accounts. So it really helps clean up and delete accounts and set some ground rules around, you know, how we segment our data and how we go to market and how we prospect. And then we communicated weekly with an email that provided a really detailed project plan. If folks wanted to view that, they could. But in the body of the email, that was where we had our high-level, executive-level details on what happened this week. And so, for example, we would send out a note and say, you know, we updated revenue on 25% of our accounts, or, you know, and I mentioned the deletions. We were able to delete, you know, 10,000 accounts that didn't have a DUNS number or what have you. And so the project itself, you know, it took about 18 months, and the data's never done. So after about 18 months, we kind of wrapped up the project, but it's never done. So coming out of that, we really said, you know, here's where we stand today. Here's why we feel good about this. Here's what you can expect from us in the future, and sort of really gave our internal stakeholders a framework and a management plan and a governance plan that they could, you know, refer back to and know what to expect out of. So right now we can make decisions confidently. We're more data-driven. Our match rate is really high in terms of how do our accounts match up to the Dun & Bradstreet global data set. So we have a 95% match rate. As I mentioned, we removed 10,000 accounts. A lot of those were out of business, or they were outside of our ideal customer profile. And we can provide marketing with not only the segmentation for campaigning, but we can also give them data-driven insights on, you know, okay, we want to do a deep dive industry campaign. If we didn't have, you know, D&B data with sub-industry or line of business description, it'd be hard for us to really hone in on a certain industry and target better. So that's important. But one of the most important things for us was the linkages. So we were able to pull together 4,000 accounts that were sitting as standalone companies and bring them into an enterprise corporate family. And that just really changed the game in terms of not only how we align to ABM, but also how we serve our customers, and knowing the knowledge of, you know, what the business units are at a certain customer account is really important for cross and upsell. So I think that also ties really well. It's going to tie really well, and we've started to see it tie back to, okay, what does it look like for us in terms of our ideal customer and their journey, and are we targeting the right folks? So we're getting fewer support inquiries about who owns what. We're spending more time being productive about our data and less time cleaning. So we're doing more white space. We're doing more planning and trying to expand territories. And that's been really great. And Carrie's going to talk a lot about these things at a high level, but I really want to point out that we did use a lot of the Sirius Decisions Forrester framework to handle a lot of this stuff. So I think that was very important for me in really making a program work well for us. So what we're doing today, we're really just continuously updating our data with Optimizer for Salesforce, which is provided by D&B. Keeps up with changes in mergers and acquisitions and changes to corporate families, helps us to identify out-of-business accounts. It really helps our ABM strategy. You know, we're integrated in Salesforce, and I think that that's a critical piece in all of this is once you've cleaned up your data, it immediately starts to decay again. So having an integration with the tool is critical, I think, and being more proactive, as I talked about, and less reactive. And so today we're really able to provide our sellers with deeper corporate insights. We're using Hoovers to do that as well, so they have their own access to what's going on at a certain company they're targeting. We can plan better for sales planning at the end of the year, and even in H2 we're looking at, you know, is our pipeline healthy? Do we, you know, want to expand more? Do we have enough coverage? So we're able to do that now. And really, you know, more efficient use of our marketing dollars, which is key. So we only spend money on the accounts that matter to us.
Great. Hi, everybody. This is Kerry, and so I'm going to take you through now how we advise our clients to work through putting together a data governance strategy so that we can have this work well on an ongoing basis. So a lot of what Kate just talked about are things that we see across all of our clients. There are so many of these issues that we see throughout B2B organizations, and you're going to recognize a lot of the things that we're talking about. So one, no standard definitions of what a field means. A field that is a first name field in Salesforce might have different parameters from the same field of data in marketing automation, in finance and accounting systems, all over the place. And so they can't interoperate very well. You get lots of data redundancies and lots of misses. We see a lot of time spent recreating the same data that already exists in organizations in various places. We see different measures of what an audience is, what your addressable market is, what your target market is, who the best contacts to be reaching out to are. All of these things can be addressed through data governance, but probably the key thing, and I think you saw this in what Kate was talking about, the CSO had a lot of great ideas for how to improve Brainshark's performance. They wanted to adopt some ABM practices, absolutely best practices for go-to-market, but you can't do it if you don't trust the data. We often talk about not being able to do the really cool stuff if you don't have good data, but honestly, you really can't do any of the just good stuff that we want everybody to be able to do unless you trust the data. And so we end up using that term a lot. Can you trust the data? Do you have confidence in the data? And the answer, unfortunately, for most folks is no for the most part, but we've seen a ton more emphasis on this. So, going back to what Sean talked about from the findings of the survey, we've seen a pretty strong increase over the last couple of years in the interest and concern about data and having good data in the organization. Organizations know that they must be more data oriented, data driven. But at the same time, it seems like really complicated and overwhelming to do to get to that state. So how do we get there? Well, that's the place that we help our clients with the most. Kate pointed to this. She talked about making it an official thing. This idea of having your data clean and having good data governance, it absolutely has to be a real thing for everybody in the organization. The best way we know to do that is to establish a data governance team or data governance council. It needs an executive sponsor, somebody who cares deeply about the data. It doesn't have to be somebody from an operational role, but it often is marketing operations, sales operations, revenue operations. And then you've got to have a council of interested parties. So, for most of our clients, it'll be somebody from the marketing organization, a leader from the sales organization, marketing ops, sales ops, customer operations frequently as well, all represented on this council. And the idea of the council is to have oversight over how data is used and transformed within the organization. And we'll talk about what a process for implementing that looks like. Kate also talked about having a data steward. And so data stewards in the organization, we like to see them aligned to functions, at least, sometimes even more granular than that, depending upon the size of the organization and what your resources are. But these are folks inside the operation who have a clear understanding of the data that their part of the organization uses and what people in that part of the organization need from the data. And so putting together a team that's going to oversee that is really critical, especially to start. We'll talk about this more in a couple of minutes. You hear this cliche about, it's not a crash diet, it's a lifestyle change. In many cases, having good data and getting to the point where you can trust the data is actually both. Like there's a component of it that is a crash diet. You got to get things fixed. But then it is a lifestyle change. Otherwise, you're just going to be on this roller coaster of having crash diets after crash diets and not very effective operations. So to get to that point where you can be a data-driven organization, it actually doesn't start with the data itself. It starts with, what do we need to do with the data? What do we need the data to do for us? And that's the top part of the circle here, insight requirements. What are you going to do with data? Who needs the data in your organization? We'll talk about how to understand that in a minute, but it really begins there. It begins with, what do we need from the data in the organization? Sometimes that means looking around at other organizations, at peer organizations, at competitor organizations. We're talking to Sirius Decisions about what are the best-in-class organizations doing with their data, what will having really great data allow us to do, and then start to look at the data itself. Where are we today? Do we have multiple silos of data throughout the organization? And then what's the state of the quality of the data? I'll talk in a second about how to get there. And then the third piece of being data-driven, which we think is obviously really critical, is the culture of the organization and whether the team, everybody in the organization, is on board with being data-driven. And one way to think about that is, in many organizations, people are fond of saying, oh, I'm a numbers guy, I'm a data-driven person, etc. But when the numbers or the data suggest something that they don't agree with, they override the data, they override the insights, they override whatever it is that doesn't agree with what they're doing. That's not data-driven. Right? So being data-driven says when we understand the data when it's presented to us, and then we take action on what the insights are from the data. We don't override it with our gut instincts all the time. And that requires that people understand, at least at a base level, what kinds of insights are available from data. Basic things like simply understanding what a correlation is really important, right? Everybody in the organization is going to be making decisions based on data, have to understand at least something about what that data actually means and what it doesn't mean so that you can make good decisions. So that this last piece is the piece that allows you to go from a crash diet where you fix all your data once to a lifestyle change where the data is governed appropriately and then the organization runs based on the insights that come from the data. That really is this team enablement piece that allows that to happen and to have some legs in the organization. All right, so some common traits if you're going to have a robust data strategy is very often we want to start small. It's not a great idea to transform all of your data all at once or to try to. So bite off a piece of the organization to understand the data, and we'll walk through that process in just a second, and then start to build off those successes. It's really important to communicate about what's happening. What's going to happen when you start to implement a data governance strategy is you're going to ask a lot of people a lot of questions. You're going to take up some people's time with questions about data that they don't necessarily want to deal with. And if you don't communicate about the status of the data governance process and about the benefits and the results and the quick wins of that, then people are going to think that it's just it was just a waste of time, it was a flash in the pan, and then gone altogether. So it's really important to communicate regularly about the data. That doesn't mean long white papers to the entire organization about how the data governance process is going, but it means short, informative communications that explain quick wins or maybe also explain some of the roadblocks that the organization is facing. If this is an important issue for your organization, then that needs to be clear to everybody, and why it is needs to be clear to everybody. So we don't need to dwell on that too much, but it's really important that you communicate that effectively. And then the Data Governance Council is really the part of the organization that, the governance that the Data Governance Council instills is really governance over the commitment to continuing to have good, clean, usable data that supports all of the goals of the organization. So again, starting with the goals of the organization and then looking at how data is brought into and used within the organization as the lens into what to govern that data. I won't walk through this kind of eye charty thing in great detail, except to say that we have a really great framework for understanding how to instill a data-driven mindset within your organization. And it begins by understanding who in the organization uses data, how do they use it, what do they need from it, and how are they going to go about monitoring that on an ongoing basis. And so let's take a look at the process that we would want to go through in order to have that data-driven organization. So I've talked a lot about the first column here already, which is establishing the governance. It really means establishing that governance council. We like organizations to have a charter. So what is that data governance council going to do? And one of the reasons that this is so important is we want to make it clear also what that data governance council is not going to do. So for instance, we don't want a data governance council to be a sales prevention team. We don't want it to get in the way of actually running the business effectively. So that means you don't have a data governance council meeting to evaluate every minor field change to every database or every data set in the organization. That's not really what it is. It's really to have oversight over the entire organization and to make sure that when there are changes that are going to be substantive that will impact multiple parts of the organization, that all those impacted parts of the organization hear about it, understand it, and where they need to, that they have a voice in how that data, that new data or change data is implemented in the organization. The second thing, so once you've established that governance council, they're really going to be responsible for doing what's in the rest of these columns. And what's in the rest of these columns is, first of all, understanding all of the key processes that you want to govern. And this is where having a pilot comes in handy. Right? So identifying every process that uses data in the organization is probably not a reasonable thing to start with. But if you, for instance, are starting, say, looking at marketing and or sales data, you can start to look at a couple of important processes. How do we identify our addressable market? How do we identify buying group members that we want to target, buyer personas? How many do we have? Do we have complete buyer personas? So take some limited processes and start to make an inventory of what data is used in those parts of the, in those processes within the organization and who uses that data. So begin small. And you can do this next thing though with the pilot, which is capture the voice of the customer. So that's what that V of C is. So we're not talking about your external customers here. We're talking about the internal customers of the data. So ultimately for each business process in the organization that uses data, and presumably at this point that's all of the business processes, we need to understand who the key users of that business or operators of that business process are, how do they use data, what do they need from the data, and what is it that today prevents them from being able to do their jobs effectively or limits the effectiveness of the way that they do their job. And then what are the best practices that they'd like to be engaging in that they can't for whatever reason because of the data. So capturing that voice of the customer is really critical. That tells you what you're going to need from the data and who's going to need it within the organization. That document helps you later look back and say, oh, okay, well, somebody wants to make a change to the last name field in Salesforce. Here are the 4 people within the organization or 4 parts of the organization, the owners of that, who are impacted by that. So let's make sure that we run this change by those parts of the organization so that we're all on the same page and we don't do something that's going to cause some damage. So once you capture that voice of the customer, next thing to do is to start to audit the current state. Again, this is a really good idea to start this as a pilot. Look at a small part of the organization or a relatively limited part. Look at demand gen, look at the processes around maybe the teleprospecting team or telequal team, and start there so that you can get a sense for how this is going to go in your organization. But we've got templates and things that you can use as well. We use this term port of entry analysis, really interesting, a really useful term for understanding that what we're looking for is every place in the organization where that data is brought into the organization, but also where that data is changed. So who in the organization changes data, what parameters do they operate within when they change that? How do we know that it's changed? How do we record that it's changed? Do we need to have a log of the change, et cetera? So that port of entry analysis Really important for understanding all of the items of data that we're looking at. And then, of course, telling us what's going to be part of the data unification strategy, which comes next. So once we've identified the current state of the organization, we've already captured the voice of the customer, which tells us what do we actually need from the data. The next step is we think of as acquire and unify data. It's both of those things. It's really where D&B is going to be helping you a lot here, is understanding what parts of what data do we have that's in separate silos that really shouldn't be. How do we unify that? There are lots of different options for unifying data. There's not just one, so it isn't just build a data lake or something like that. There are many different options available depending upon your requirements. So understanding where all the data silos are, which need to be brought together. Should we do that externally? Should we do that internally? Should we do that internally but with lots of help from third parties? All of those decisions get made. And they get made after you've done a really good job with the voice of the customer and an audit of the current state. What we see too often is that organizations rush from, hey, we want to have better data, to let's get a data unification tool or project or process going, and they don't go through the steps in between. Steps in between are kind of boring. They're not as fun as building data lakes or whatever, but it's really, really important. Finally, on an ongoing basis, how are you going to monitor what's happening with the data internally? This is where that data governance council and the data stewards come in. So in a lot of our clients, we'll see a data steward for the marketing organization. We'll see another one for the sales organization. If it's separate, perhaps one for the customer organization. If you have a RevOps team where all of the operational components of marketing, sales, and customer organizations are part of one team, then you might specialize those data stewards in a particular kind of data. And so those data stewards would become experts in what's within their purview. Either it's marketing data or sales data, or maybe it's a number of different processes that each data steward would be looking at. They'll be experts in that. And when a change is going to be made to the systems within their purview, they're going to be notified of it. They can very often look at the change and understand, okay, well, that's not that big of a deal. We don't need to bring that before the Data Governance Council, and it's not impacting any other functions. So, it's perfectly fine. And most situations are simply that okay, we're making a note that this data is going to be changed, or this new data source is going to be brought in. Perfectly fine. Don't need to notify anybody else or do anything else. On the other hand, in some cases, new systems or processes will be brought in. The data steward will be informed of that, and the data steward will say, okay, we got to bring this one to the data council this month because this is going to impact 3 or 4 other functions in an important way, and we need to make sure that we understand what that impact is and take that into account as we start to implement. All right, so that's what's going to be going on an ongoing basis. You've already done the work to capture and inventory processes and data and all of that, and now it's just going to be a matter of when big changes come in, making sure that we have oversight and governance over how that is implemented in the organization. So on an ongoing basis, it sounds like there's red tape and bureaucracy involved, but on an ongoing basis, it's really typically very little work, and only relatively rarely that the Data Governance Council actually has to step in and intervene in a process. And then finally, measuring results. It's really important when you do something like this to understand how you're going to know whether it's having impact. Right? So if one of the reasons you want to do this is because the CSO has some great ideas about go-to-market strategies, sales processes that they'd like to implement, then one, document why you can't do that with the current data today, and then as the data improves and you're able to start implementing some of those better ideas, document the impact that those processes have. Even in things like, very simply, if you've got SDRs prospecting, and you could do a time and motion study to understand how much of their time they spend cleaning up databases and calling prospects who don't exist there anymore, et cetera. And understanding when you have clean data, how does that change in the time and motion study? How have we improved the process is simply through cleaning up the data. So that's the process. That's the main way that we advise our clients to go about this. So now, happy to back to Sean.
Thanks very much, Kerry. I think that the time that we're operating in right now, the amount of change that's taking place and will take place around firmographic data, right? Which is the type of data that traditionally for the last several decades hasn't changed. The rate of change in firmographic data hasn't changed that dramatically. However, in light of the changes to the global economy and the health pandemic that we're dealing with, the rate of change associated with those specific data elements is going to be much higher now. And I think that this is now the time that you really have to ensure that you have the right type of governance put in place to manage this change and to be able to deliver the insights back to those who rely on them in a more streamlined fashion and in a more measured fashion, that you can actually understand that. So I think Kate and Kerry have talked about some really important foundational elements that we all need to be adopting. And just a couple key takeaways that I got from that were, organizations are finally seeing and investing in data quality, and that's really important. That we have to understand as organizations, we've got to understand the value and activate high data quality in those key strategic initiatives like account-based marketing, content personalization, and omni-channel activation. That core data foundation is what you build upon, and it's how you differentiate, and it's how you really understand the needs of your ideal customer profile and then speak to those things. Quality over quantity, right? Focus on that quality first. The quantity will come with, as you get better at understanding your audiences, you will attract them, you will draw them in, and the quantity of those who are relevant to your solution set and your go-to-market strategy, they will come. And establish that data governance framework. I just talked about that. It's really important now. And finally, this last point of understand your risk, but recognize your potential. That really goes to the level of change that we're all going through right now from an economic standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, and from an individual organizational standpoint. And one of the things that Dun & Bradstreet has just recently released in response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been to release this pipeline health scan. So, we're fortunate in that we sit at the nexus of a number of commercial data streams, and our ability to understand and analyze that data gives us the ability to help you as businesses understand the impact that geographic and economic and industrial factors or impacts that have taken place as a result of this pandemic. We want to give you that insight. So this pipeline health scan is a simple, if you were to give us a list of all the accounts that you currently have in your pipeline, we'll run an analysis and we can actually come back to you and highlight what percentages of that pipeline is at risk based off of where they are geographically, what sector they're in from an economic standpoint. So you can really understand what that risk is associated with your pipeline, and you can appropriately adjust any strategies or expectations that you may have for this. So this is a free offering. I highly recommend anybody doing it. You can come to our website. There's also a hyperlink on this next page here. Kate talked about the data health scan. Again, that's another free offering. It's another way for you to get some quick visual insights into the health and structure of your data quality, so you can effectively communicate what is the potential impact that data quality is having currently on your business and how you can prioritize your remediation efforts. I talked about the pipeline health scan. That's about understanding your risk but recognizing your potential. And then our data experts are willing, ready, and able to walk through any of these findings with you to help you understand and potentially start building a strategy to address any of those things. Because at the end of the day, it is all about aligning your go-to-market strategy with that data management strategy, because the two will be diametrically opposed unless they are aligned, and you need to focus on that. So I would like to thank Kerry and Kate for the time that you gave here today. and the insights that you delivered. So thank you very much. I recognize that we're a little beyond the timing here, but there were a couple of questions that I wanted to see if we could address really briefly. And the first question came for Carrie. Said, Carrie, you mentioned pilot efforts and starting small, but what if your data challenges are pretty extensive? How do you prioritize what to go after first?
Really good question. That's where I think the Data Governance Council itself can be first and foremost most useful. We've just had this experience with a client quite recently. We established the Data Governance Council. The Data Governance Council met a couple of times and evaluated the business priorities and where to start. So for us, where you're going to start in terms of the pilot depends on your priorities. Is it really about generating top of waterfall, top of funnel demand? If you're suffering in a couple of places, probably further toward the revenue end of things is more important. So if your sales reps are spending a lot of time with bad data and fixing data and all of that, probably a good idea to start there and try to get things fixed. We're not talking about a pilot here that's going to prove a concept. It's really just working out how you're going to go through this process in your organization. Concept is proven. So pick the one that's going to have the biggest impact, get people on board most, and your Data Governance Council can do that.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. And Kate, here was one question for you. Great story about Brainsharks. Kate, what roadblocks did you encounter on your path? Was anyone not on board from the beginning? And if so, how did you get around that?
Sure. Yeah. Of course. As I mentioned, this is can be a big undertaking. So yeah, I think that there certainly were roadblocks. I think there's always a sense of urgency in getting the project completed. So I think some roadblocks might be especially if this is something that needs to happen before you assign accounts to a territory. So I think, that was one roadblock that we came across, is just sort of how do we prioritize what team, gets their data clean first, I guess, for lack of better description. So just being clear and going through, a lot of what we did was funneled through, the sales managers. So if we get our sales managers on board, allow them the opportunity to voice their opinion and their feedback, really helped to let them formalize that message. And I wouldn't say that anybody was not necessarily not on board, but I think anytime you're going to do anything like this and establish these programs, you are going to have, you're going to have to sort of convince your internal stakeholders, or in our case, obviously our sales reps, that, we're in it for the greater good, in a sense. So a lot of that comes back to, if there's that single source of truth in the database. So, being very clear about here are our rules and here are the criteria we use, and everybody sort of is held to that same set of standards in terms of, if you find out the revenue on an account, is a lot bigger than what we're showing in Salesforce, here's what you can expect from the governance team in terms of, or the data stewards in terms of how they would handle that request. So that can be challenging, but I think, again, start from the executive level if you can, and at the very least, the sales managers who manage that team, and just get them to, provide their feedback and help them guide you where they can.
Great. Thank you. And then just one final question here, and I think this is related to the B2B marketing data report. What kind of impact have you seen because of COVID-19 related to your 2020 predictions? I think, I talked about, obviously COVID-19 is having a profound impact on the U.S. economy and the economies around the globe. And I think what that's going to do is that's going to, increase the rate of change around businesses going, businesses going out of business. The size of businesses are going to shrink. The revenue associated with them is going to be corrected. And I think that if anything, it actually increases the importance of investing in data quality right now. But the one mitigating factor will be, right, a prioritization internally. I think that budgets are going to be constrained. They're going to be strained moving forward. And so there's really going to be a need to justify and prove a business case for these types of investments. And you know, at D&B we have an ROI data quality calculator. You can find that on our website and start to build that business case that actually quantifies the impact of data quality on your business. So I recognize the timing here, so I wanted to take one last opportunity to thank my co-speakers here. Kate O'Leary and Terry Cunningham, thank you very much for your time and effort and insights here today. And I wish all of you a safe and healthy rest of your day and through the rest of this year as well. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.